everyone. We are here in beautiful Toronto, and I've been welcomed into the backyard of Evan. So Evan Dales is a photographer, and he has been here in Toronto for how long now, Evan?
About 35 years, yeah. I do commercial photography mostly for the Bay and IKEA and so on, and a lot of work both with products and also model photography, and I do a lot of still life work for galleries. Yeah.
And I've looked at some of your work on your website, and I would say because of the way you present your objects, I mean, you just called yourself commercial, but I would say there's a definite fine art aspect to what you're doing.
Indeed, I find actually as time has passed over the last 20 years especially, I'm really spending a lot more time presenting things in an overtly artistic way as opposed to just depicting the objects. Even when I do commercial stuff, I sort of insist on that now. I feel like if it's not an image that's worthwhile to absorb the viewer for a period of time, there's no point taking all the trouble that's involved in doing the shot.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate you setting up here in your backyard. I know it's quite an elaborate thing to do. I always start the artists off sort of talking about their journey and how they got into the creative work that they're doing.
Well, I have been doing photography since I was quite young. I got my first actual proper SLR at 12, I think it was, and was pretty excited about that. I've been lucky enough that I've had some opportunities to do some good commercial work with larger entities and so on. So I started off doing a little bit of work when I was in Hamilton, back in the days of film, if you all remember what that was. And I was lucky enough to sort of do that to earn a little bit of extra income into I think there were a lot of opportunities back then because people needed help. So a serious photographer would get assistance and so on. I did a little bit of work for a couple of people out there. I was always excited about the art aspect of things, visual art in general. I'm not a great illustrator, but I was able to capture things pretty well on film in those days. I certainly got even more excited about it with digital because now it's much less painful to get to the actual meaningful result. That's a big thing I've noticed over the last 20 years. The other advantage, of course, is no torn film, no toxic chemicals. I really appreciate that.
So along your journey as a creative, were there certain obstacles and things that kind of you had to navigate to continue on?
Well, there's, I think, three things that are universal to a lot of artists. Of course, there's always the big challenge of the financial stuff, trying to survive and be consistently successful. And I've been lucky that I have been somewhat successful, but it's often sporadic. There's pauses and so on. And of course, the difficulty of meeting the needs of those who might be paying for something while still producing something that's artistic and at least somewhat original. That's the challenge. The other thing for me, of course, is that there's a lot of technical aspects of photography that have to be really mastered properly. You can't be a mediocre photographer shooting in automatic mode and do these kinds of things commercially, or even for serious art. So there's a lot of learning involved. I'm reading all the time. I'm taking courses all the time. I'm researching stuff all the time. And bear in mind, I was formally trained a long time ago and been doing this a long time. See, it's a lot of work keeping up with it. It's technology plus art. You know, I think a person who illustrates with a pencil can skate away with not using too much technology and they're still probably okay. Although I think more and more everybody needs it. I really have to be conversant. So that's a big challenge for me.
Yeah, even a painter these days needs to learn a little bit of technology in order to promote themselves, especially when things are shut down and you can't show your work anymore and the only other option is to get it online.
Absolutely. I think too there's a sort of a subtle difference in presentation between people who can just barely get it out into the web and people who can present well, know a little bit of web design, know a little bit about promotion and so on. They can create a much more attractive presence, and that's almost an art form in itself. It becomes a secondary art form behind the real thing you're pursuing. I think that's important, right? So people get a sense of the seriousness from that kind of carries over into their respect for the work that they're doing. Yeah. I'm going to attempt to take a couple shots of this grouping here. I do this, as serious photographers would say, I do this all the hard way. I'm shooting the raw format of the camera, not in JPEG, so there's extra work in software afterwards. I do what's called focus stacking, so I'll take 5 or 6 or 10 shots of segments of the photo from near to back to get it all nice and sharp. And I'm, of course, working on a tripod and shooting with proper studio lighting, which yields a better shot, but it's more work and more technical, and there's a little bit more fiddling involved.
I've been asking artists this year how you've, I guess, pivoted is the catchphrase that they're using these days.
Well, so for me, there's kind of two things that have really affected me. One was I was actually lucky enough to have been selected for the Contact Festival, which is a huge international photography festival. But yeah, so I was lucky enough to have that, and unfortunately the plague came along and basically canceled that festival. But I was lucky enough to get a spot in an actual gallery downtown nonetheless. So fortunately, people did see that work, which was a blessing. And I've been lucky enough that because I do shooting the small objects, I have been getting some work doing that. They'll mail it to me, I'll spray down everything with alcohol, I'll shoot it, mail it back to them, and of course digitally send them over the stuff.
So was photography always the path that you wanted to take, or did you try other forms of visual art?
I'm actually split pretty equally between doing composition for movies and soundtrack and artists and so on, so music work, and doing photography. I do both and actually make a living at both. Two very different worlds. Two very different worlds. A bunch of people whose primary problem when you're dealing with them is overtight, fearful businessmen on the one end, and on the other end, a bunch of people who frankly are a little bit too relaxed, and you have to get them to be a little bit more alert and professional. It's an interesting shift going between dealing with one group of humans and the other.
So over the last 35 years, what moments stand out for you to be the most memorable?
I don't do a ton of event work, but I remember having a great deal of fun. There was a period of time where I was doing some shooting for the newspapers, and I had gotten asked to do, through them to do some work for the Bay. And I got to actually shoot some really interesting people over that time. Some of the most famous race car drivers at the time in the world, Emilio Castrovenis and so on. I got to shoot them all and interview them and do a bunch of work with them. And a couple of Miss Canadas, that was very nice. I was very excited to remember the first time I actually got some stuff sent over by L'Oreal. That was pretty cool. And they let me be artistic, which is nice. Usually it's put it on a plain colored background, just show us what the object looks like, maybe drip some water on it to make it look pretty, right? They let me do a scene, you know? That was pretty exciting seeing it in a magazine context. That's quite a while ago now. I think the other thing that's really nice is I've always enjoyed seeing the work up in a gallery where people can look at it in a physical print. You know, they're going up and experiencing your work, and you're standing next to them. Often they don't know that you're even there or who you are, and you're just listening to them talk about it as its own thing, telling its own story. And sometimes they're seeing a story that you hadn't imagined that's way more interesting than what you had imagined.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of cool. I love watching how it produces an image or a story or an idea in other people.
Yeah. I think that's what I've missed most being in this lockdown situation, is not being able to interact with people that enjoy the artwork and hear them talk about it and ask questions and be able to explain your intentions for the work.
Absolutely. And just, to get that warmth of a human reaction to it too. Because if you work in isolation for a long time, likes on Facebook are nice, but it doesn't really feel like people care about what you're doing.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, it could be hard. I think this is going to remind us all to appreciate it when people do take the time and trouble to observe our work and appreciate it. And hopefully, for a lot of people who are kind of just beginning along art, photography, or other creative things, hopefully they've had some quiet time to really get good at what they're doing. I think there's going to be a huge burst of really high quality creativity after this we haven't seen for the last few years. People have had time without interruption to go and concentrate on their art, their dance, their music, and do it really, really well.
Yep. So one of the questions that I've asked everybody in season 1 and season 2, and I think I'm going to carry it on through, is where do you see yourself in 10 years? Hopefully
still working in the studio, both doing my musical stuff and the photography. It's the kind of work I enjoy. A lot of people like the adventure as a photographer of going out and shooting things like weddings and events, which are more exciting, and I've certainly done some of that work, but to me, I prefer doing one task very well in great detail and really laboring over it as opposed to taking hundreds of shots that are pretty good, And I enjoy the quiet work in a stable setting. I think that's part of it. I'm naturally one of those people who I think would always enjoy working in a lab or somewhere quiet and controlled. And I like the fact that it's overtly fine art, that one's purposely concentrating on just presenting something in an artistic fashion as opposed to just capturing something else that's randomly occurring around me.
Is there something you haven't done in this time that you'd like to do in the next 10 years?
I think one of the things I'm starting to tackle now, and it's of course quite a bit of setup, is to do really big complex scenes that are not at all for commercial purposes, but for artistic purposes. We're talking about scenes that are 6 or 10 feet wide and sometimes will involve 60 or 70 objects. It's a much greater artistic challenge to make those kinds of things attractive, to keep the shapes harmonious, find the right negative space, to keep the colors tamed and relating to each other well. That's tricky, right? The more complexity you tackle, the more difficult it is to have it feel beautiful and pleasing to the eye. So that's the thing I want to do. I suppose other than that, it'd be nice to see some of the work in kind of galleries in a longer term kind of a way. I've had a lot of kind of these little 2 or 4 or 6 week shows. I think it would be kind of nice to have some things hanging in the McMichael Gallery for 30 years or so people could enjoy them. Because I ain't going to be here forever, but hopefully some of this will.
Do you have any final thoughts or ideas you'd like to share with the artists who are watching?
Okay, a couple of big things, because I teach and I see a lot of this stuff. First of all, don't get discouraged either because the technical or skill things are too hard for you in the beginning. Just keep going. Just keep doing it if you love it and learn all you can. And the second thing is don't become discouraged because you're not getting the kind of feedback or response right away that you want. Part of the challenge as an artist is finding the community of people who will appreciate what you do. And it's not always in the obvious places. It may not be on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or things like that. And it may unfortunately not be in a convenient, easy to get to place that involves you sitting comfortably on your couch, right? You may have to get up, get out among groups of people. You may have to be a little bit aggressive about putting yourself in front of human beings and taking the risk of emotional disapproval. And there'll be plenty. But if you believe in what you're doing, the key thing I think is that as you keep doing that, it changes your character in a subtle way that makes people take you more seriously. And then that same person, a couple of years later, suddenly is giving you opportunities, and it goes from there. Right? So it sounds like a weird thing to say to artists, but develop a certain amount of detached toughness, and you'll probably enjoy your art more and be more successful at it. You know? Don't be too sensitive.
So I really want to thank you today, Dale. It's been great coming out here to join you in the backyard, learn a bit about photography and artists and your journey.
I really appreciate you coming on out. Yeah. And for the folks trapped at home, find something fun and creative to do.
Exactly. Thanks so much.